Hey guys, so I'm still in Jakarta, and I thought I'd take this opportunity to explain one of the differences between Malaysia and Indonesia. So one thing you see is I'm now on the other side of, about a 20-minute walk on the other side of where I was before. And I wanted to sort of show the difference, one major difference between Malaysia and Indonesia. So you see there are sidewalks here on this side. So obviously, as I said before, the roads are, for the cars and the motorcycles are immaculate. So one of the things that's interesting is that when you look at in Indonesia, Jakarta in particular, is you see the difference between slow growth and fast growth. So what happened here is what happened in many countries all over the world, whether in Chile under Pinochet with LKY, in Singapore, and under Suharto here in Indonesia. What happened was resistance to economic acceleration was removed oftentimes with violence, especially here in Indonesia. And whether it was called communist or something else, the fact of the matter was the banking system wanted more predictability before they would invest. And when Suharto came in and replaced Sukarno, who was struggling with massive inflation that was making this country essentially allegedly uninvestable, what happened here was an economic boom. I shouldn't say an economic boom, really a growth boom. Unlike anything we've seen before in our lifetimes. And you can see this also in the Western dress. You go into a store like Sarina, she was in the mall the other day. They still have the department store down there. The perfume counters are not there. You can imagine like a Nordstrom, if you're an American, then a Nordstrom, which by the way was also founded by an immigrant, I believe a Swedish immigrant. Might have been, Swedish, German, and all that. And you go into these places, and we look at the photos, and people are in a Western style because it was presumed that if you had a tie and a suit, that you were part of progress. And you can also see this in Iran. You can see in Iran, some people would decide to, wear the Western style, and again, it was to signify something, a break from the past and moving into the new. And this is interesting, right? Because what that meant in actuality was post-1945, what that meant was essentially siding with the West. And you can see right now, you've got buildings everywhere. Just the fact that there are buildings here means something. It means that somebody invested, once upon a time, they invested here. That the developers decided to invest here and not there, not somewhere else. And so you can look at these buildings now, and they are a Western style. You look at them, they call it like a Dutch style, but you can see right behind me, you might as well, I could be in London right now, really, except for the fact that the buildings are old. And because the economic progress was so quick, it was unsustainable. And so when you're traveling, I want you to sort of think about a couple of things. And one of the things you want to think about is, I'm here, there's stuff here, somebody had to build it. Who financed it? What were the conditions that existed so that somebody would be able to come here and not there? And when you go to Malaysia, you see something similar, but certainly outside of KL, you don't really see this level of quick development where buildings are everywhere. And so, you've got a really interesting situation now because obviously the government's doing its job. Again, it doesn't matter where you go, the roads are immaculate. But look at the buildings right behind. So you go back and forth into who is more qualified, right, to lead the way. The private sector, the developers, the banks, or the government, which can also borrow money or print money. And so you go around, you walk around, and then you try to figure out what is it that makes a country successful. Is it the colleges, the education system? Is it the banking sector, the stability of the currency? And those are all big questions. But what you want to look at when you're here, right, when you're traveling, is why is this here and not there? And that's why, you have to imagine a place once upon a time when none of this actually existed. And, you've got some really interesting stuff here. Obviously, you're looking at, we're in Taman, Palem, which is a predominantly Chinese area. And that's particularly interesting here in Indonesia because the Chinese suffered discrimination here in Indonesia. And it sort of makes you think about the riots between Malaysia and Singapore. You go back and forth, and one of the things you want to think about is you have all this industry. And is it the case that having economic growth necessarily produces a stable middle class? And then the answer in Jakarta is that it creates, when you have economic growth that is too quick, you certainly end up somewhere. But now that you have to create a livable city, the question is, now you've got to build over all these structures that were built before during a time when this particular area was the best place to invest, right? That's why, or one of the better places to invest. So when you're traveling, you really want to think about all these different things, and you want to think about, just the infrastructure on a big level, on a macro level, and on a micro level. It really helps, because obviously there are more motorcycles here, just like there are in Vietnam, right? Saigon particularly. Again, why is that? Why is it the cars are, too expensive for a large portion? Is it, what does that say about consumer credit? What does that say about interest rates? What does that say about the whole country as as a whole, in a sense? So you look at all these things, and then you try to figure out, what is going to happen in the future? What is the country going to look like in the future? Because you have to remember something, that even Singapore, the most developed country in this area, in this region, once upon a time had what's called a kampong structure. And, hello, sampai jumpa. So you look at over there, and it's a really interesting scenario because, I'm looking over here, right behind me here, and now you've got really nice buildings. Let me see if I can walk over there. You've got security guards over here, so the question is, how much do you spend on security on this level? You've got commerce, all these things, right? They're nice to look at. Let me show you the building I was mentioning earlier. It's right behind me. Really nice. And again, this is all commerce. Where do these people get their products? You're looking at a market, an outdoor market. And again, this was something, if you go to Singapore a long time ago, or even in the United States, on the east side of where I live, a long time ago, right? It looked like this. I mean, you would go in, and it would just be an outdoor market. Singapore changed all that, right? Even Thailand, I think, is moving a lot of these markets indoors, right? So it's giving, in a sense, developers more power, but also at the same time, now you might be renting, but maybe one day you can buy the storefront, the toko. So again, you want to go around and try to think about what does all this mean in terms of prices, in terms of jobs, in terms of, quality of life. And, it's just amazing to be in a country that's so young and so diverse. But what does it all mean in the end? And what is this country going to look like, 10 years from now? What is it that made Singapore go from a kampong culture into what it is today? And how is it going to change overall? These are all just really interesting things to think about. And the massive building behind me that's obviously modern, right? And can't really, there we go. So what is it that made that developer choose to go there and not here? And what is it that made them take the risk? Because right below that hotel or office building, there might be, slums, or what we would consider a favela or something else. But they're still building. And, is that something that can be encouraged? Is that, how do you maintain all these different growth, factors in a way that eventually leads to a stable middle class? China's done it, and it's a massive country, so there's no reason why Indonesia can't do it. And what does that have to do overall? How do you do it? How do you do it without necessarily becoming dependent on another country's technology? How do you do it while at the same time preserving, what some might say is a more honest or a more comfortable way of life? I'm not sure comfortable is the right word, but just a way of life that's more inclusive. You don't see this, and you're not going to see that in Singapore anymore, right? So just people walking around, in that, selling things just basically off of a cart. That's not happening anymore. It did happen when I was there 20 something years ago. Like, that did happen. So what is it that changes? And what is this country going to really look like? And how is it going to change? Everything changes. And what is going to be the pace of change? And how are you going to blend the old with the new? But in terms of economic growth, the faster you grow, especially if you don't have zoning, city planning becomes really interesting 10, 20 years down the road, particularly if there's a change in government, or a government that has, a different policy. So I'm going to go ahead and check out some, looks like, it's not calamansi, there's different names everywhere here, but that's Nama calamansi? No? Okay. Limon? Okay. Sorry, I speak like I'm mixing my Spanish and my Bahasa. So anyway, that's basically it. Hopefully you two can come over here and just soak in something that probably won't be here in about 10 years. Simply because development, is probably inevitable in these kinds of places. And it wouldn't surprise me if one day you had so much renovation that one day a lot of the buildings started to look like the one right behind me.